Drones have become an inextricable part of the battlefield, and in many cases, they've changed the paradigm of how wars are fought.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So the Pentagon wants to buy hundreds of thousands of drones, 300,000 to be exact, and boost U.S. drone production in the process. So what does this tell us about the focus of modern warfare? Plus, U.S. farmers are shelling out more for fuel and fertilizer because of the Iran war, and that includes many who voted for President Trump back in 2024. So will they stand by the Republican Party in November? So there's technically still a ceasefire in place between the U.S. and Iran, if you squint, but it's getting harder and harder to see. So earlier today, Iran fired a missile at an American base in Kuwait, which Iran says was in response to U.S. strikes late Wednesday that targeted the port city of Bandar Abbas near the Strait of Hormuz. Now, these are just the latest exchanges in this back and forth that has seen both countries accusing the other one of violating the ceasefire deal. And meanwhile, while all of this is happening in the Gulf, the Defense Department has not stopped stockpiling. Last year, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth launched a $1.1 billion program to purchase 300,000 drones. Now, the Pentagon has kicked off a series of competitions aimed at finding the best drones possible. So why is the Department of Defense making this investment? And how could it reshape the battlefield for the U.S. moving forward? For this, I want to bring in Jane Lytvynenko, senior technology reporter for NBC News. Hi, Jane.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So this program is an attempt, it seems, to address what the administration is saying is a deficit in first-person view, or FPV drones. Starting us off, what exactly are FPV drones? What are they used for?
These drones are small quadcopters, usually quadcopters, that are essentially one-way attack munition that can be used to attack enemy equipment or infantry or intercept other larger drones, for example. They have become an incredibly important weapon on the battlefield. Their use was popularized in Russia's war against Ukraine and Ukraine's desire to have a cheap solution for the lack of more expensive weapons.
This is the FPV drones are a cheap solution.
Correct.
Are a cheaper solution.
They're a much cheaper solution.
They're unmanned.
They are piloted at a distance,
Okay.
And they can be used to take out a tank, a helicopter, a truck, enemy infantry. And Ukraine makes millions per year. Domestically, they estimated that they're capable of making about 8 million this year. The Pentagon wants to buy 300,000 to start and integrate these systems into its armed forces.
Got it. But not necessarily from Ukraine.
No, not necessarily from Ukraine.
And is there a real deficit of these FPV drones here in the United States?
The leaders of the program argue that, yes. This is a weapon that's very quickly becoming ubiquitous. There's hardly a continent or a conflict we haven't seen it used in. And it is something that the U.S. needs proficiency in.
Who is the most proficient in these FPV drones? Who's using them the most right now?
Of course, Russia and Ukraine are both incredibly proficient in these weapons. They line the length of the front line, which is about 1,200 kilometers. China also produces a large amount of these weapons and has integrated them into their armed forces.
So how much of a hold does China actually have on this drone production, considering the president has repeatedly said, as well as the administration, that they want to move more production to the United States?
The rough estimates is that China supplies about 80% of the
80%
of the global drone market. It has had a leg up because it is a production powerhouse. So the whole point of the competition acquiring these 300,000 drones is to stimulate production outside of China. So the Pentagon is essentially betting that if they throw money at the problem, the market is going to find a way to fix it. And the first round of drones that they've ordered, they ordered at about $5,000. They want to eventually bring that price down to about $3,500 per drone. And as a matter of fact, it is a requirement for the drones participating in the competition to not have Chinese components in them.
So walk me through this competition and who's besting it, who's winning the competition right now.
So the competition is called the Drone Dominance Gauntlet. It's essentially a series.
The Drone Dominance Gauntlet.
Correct.
Did Hegseth come up with that name?
I don't know who came up with it. But it's essentially a series of 4 competitions where over the course of a few days, military pilots are testing out drones that the companies are supplying. And the winners of the competition are then awarded with an order from the Pentagon. There's only been one competition so far. The second one is going to take place in August. And essentially imagine a drone flying through a series of challenges to get to its target. In this case, it was, a mannequin, but in the battlefield, of course, it would have a real target. And the creators of the program don't want to, put their finger on the scale, so they're quite tight-lipped about what specifically they're looking for with the winning drones. But the point is that the pilots get to fly them. The pilots get about 2 hours to learn how to fly a specific drone system. And then once they figure it out, to do their mission. And so, yes, drone production and purchasing the drones is a big part of the competition, as is bringing down the price. But the systems themselves have to be incredibly functional in order for the military pilots to be able to fly them.
And so far, there's a UK company that is besting all the others?
Yes. So in the first round of competition, a UK-based company called Skycutter placed almost 20 points above anybody else. And they are partnered with a Ukrainian drone company called Skyfall, which is very widely used on the battlefield, and it's quite well known.
And also a great Daniel Craig film.
And a great
James Bond
Daniel
movie.
Craig film.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is this kind of arms race, I would say? What does this say about the future of war, the future of battlefields, considering the ongoing conflicts right now in the Middle East between Russia and Ukraine, and who knows really what is next?
Drones have become an inextricable part of the battlefield. And in many cases, they've changed the paradigm of how wars are fought. Every military in the world is looking at Russia and Ukraine, but also at each other to try to figure out how they can use this technology, how they can counter this technology. It's partially why it changes so quickly. The Drone Dominance Gauntlet is holding competitions every 6 months because they understand that every 6 months a new drone will be on the market. In Ukraine, that rate of iteration is much smaller, from weeks to a couple of months. And while we're talking about FPV drones now, and that's what this competition is focusing on, drones overall are a growing, hugely growing military technology that's developing even now. We've seen sea drones. We are now seeing ground drones emerge as a new technology. So it's something that's not going to be put in the box, and something that Western militaries particularly need to be catching up on.
Jane Lytvynenko, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we are back with Here's the Scoop from NBC News. So we all know that the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran has basically shut down the Strait of Hormuz, halting shipments of oil, gas, and fertilizer, and causing global prices to surge. And that is causing some massive headaches for American farmers who need diesel to power their tractors and fertilizer to grow their crops. And American farmers are a pillar of President Trump's electoral base. So will this shake their faith? NBC News senior White House reporter Peter Nicholas has been talking to those farmers in Iowa, and he's joining me now. Hi, Peter.
Good to be with you again.
It's great to have you. So you spoke to about a dozen farmers or so in the state of Iowa. What did they tell you about the fallout from the war with Iran? It's how it's specifically impacting their farms, their businesses.
Well, it's having a direct effect on their bottom lines. In some cases, the impact is they're experiencing now. In some cases, they anticipate hardships later. But as you point out, the Strait of Hormuz closure has had a major effect. Diesel prices are up by about $1.50 per gallon since the war started, and fertilizer prices are way up as well. I spoke to one farmer who was saying that before the war started, he was paying maybe $750 per ton for fertilizer. Now, within a few days of the war's launch on February 28th, he got a note from a supplier saying that the price had jumped by about $100 per ton. Now it's up to over $1,000 per ton.
What is it like for a farmer like that whose profit margins are already so small and now having to pay so much more for this fertilizer, which is integral to keeping his business going?
So I asked that question to this particular farmer. His name is Mark Muller, and his one-word answer was bleak.
Wow.
And I heard similar things from other farmers too. They describe conditions as scary, as volatile, and they're really worried. They love their farms. In many cases, they're third, fourth generation farmers, and they're concerned that they won't be able to pass their farms down to descendants, to future generations. In some cases, these farms are major assets that will help their children and grandchildren live, for decades to come, and they're worried that these assets may be vanishing before their eyes.
And it's not happening in a vacuum. You use the word bleak, right? You use the word volatile. They're dealing with climate volatility. They're dealing with labor shortages. They're dealing with, as I mentioned, kind of smaller profit margins. They're making less money.
Yeah, the profit margins are very low. So when expenses go up, and expenses have been going up, it squeezes them even further. We've seen instances of bankruptcies and suicides happening in America's farming industry because they have no control over the price. The price of their crop, corn or soybeans, is set by impersonal market forces, and costs are going up everywhere. We talked about diesel fuel and fertilizer, but also machinery, parts, and the cost of a new tractor or a new combine could be $1 million or more. And repair costs are also high. These are major expenses that just keep rising. President Trump has said the price of fuel will go down when the Iran war ends, but it's not clear when that's going to happen, number one. And number two, the farmers are skeptical. They say prices go up quickly and come down slowly. So that's the grim environment they're enduring.
So let's talk about President Trump and his efforts to fix some of these issues. He is giving out direct aid, including subsidies and financial aid to the farmers. At a summit with the Chinese president, he announced that China would buy more than $17 billion worth of agricultural products by 2028, which would be a boon if it comes through. But that is to try and remedy the impact of his tariffs on China, which cut U.S. farm exports by about $15 billion from March of 2025 to February of 2026. So I got to ask, has this administration been good for the farming industry, for farmers in general, for their bottom line?
Farmers and I talked about that quite a bit. And one farmer I spoke to supports President Trump, voted for him 3 times. But when I asked if Trump has been good to the farming industry in the United States, he paused and he says, well, that remains to be seen. So they like President Trump. They like him personally. There's some question whether these policies are going to succeed. So take the direct cash payment that came this year to the tune of about $12 billion. The farmers got the check, but they say the money was quickly dispersed and paid to suppliers who've been raising prices. So it's not like, the check stayed in their bank accounts all that long. And with China, well, China in Trump's first term also agreed to buy more agricultural product. There's been a study that done by the Peterson Institute, a nonpartisan organization, that found China didn't entirely live up to that agreement. So there's some questions. Will China follow through and buy these products, or will it pull back, which has happened in the past?
The president is not on the ballot come November, but do you think his policies and the economic impact of the war with Iran could be a liability for Republicans, especially amongst rural voters after having spent some time with these farmers?
I think so. For now, they seem to be sticking with Trump, but they are deeply concerned about these economic trends, price of goods, inflation, all the things we've been talking about. So in a tight race, and Iowa has a Senate seat that's up for grabs at this point, incumbent Republican Senator Joni Ernst is retiring. So there's an opportunity for Democrats to make a pickup. if Democrats net 4 seats, they'll gain control of the Senate. So Trump has to be worried about this, and he's trying hard to remind farmers that he's on their side, he's aligned with them. He invited hundreds of farmers and ranchers to the White House South Lawn in March, talked to them about the things he's doing to try to improve their lives. So he's definitely got his eye on this important constituency, and he needs them to show up in November to keep that Republican Senate seat in his party's hands.
Peter Nicholas, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.